Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 360 view of diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice webinar. We've got today in attendance, and I'm going to go through a little bit later the bios. Jason Thompson is here from the US, and we've got Tim from Prompta, and Ruby's here. I can't see her right now. She's got her screen covered up. And then Edward's going to be facilitating in the background. So if you have any questions in terms of anything you want to ask us, you can just text directly to Edward. I'm going to get started. I'm not sure who all is here. I hope you enjoyed this session, and please ask us some questions. So we're going to jump right into it, and we're going to have at least 10 to 15 minutes for open questions towards the end of the webinar. So please jump in and feel free to ask the question. So a little bit about what we're going to cover off today. We're going to go through a little introduction of meet the panelists. We're going to go through a little bit of each of our backgrounds as organizations, and then we're going to do an open Q&A session. And then finally, what's next? How do we address diversity, equity, inclusion from a 360 perspective? Because that's really what this is about today. A little bit about us, a little CulturaliQ. We are really a research and marketing agency focusing on identifying consumer opportunity and the cultural nuances that allow our customers in North America to really realize their full potential. The key here for us is looking at actionable insights, both from the point of view of research and also from the point of view of DEI strategy that really helps people identify and optimize programs going forward. This is kind of our gamut of what we offer as services. Really, we're talking today about market research and analysis. We have over 100,000 panelists in Canada and 100,000 panelists or 500,000 panelists in the States. And we're able to go in and subdivide those by ethnicity, recency, and language. And of course, we come at it from a broad spectrum, looking at the full D&I perspective. In terms of some of the things we've done in the past, and some of it you hear today, we'll talk about a bit later on. We've done 2 rounds of COVID research looking at the multicultural consumer. We finished a major research project with the Magic Canada, interviewing over 3,000 newcomers in Canada, looking at donations. And we're working with Pink Attitude on research relative to the South Asian female workforce. And finally, we're working on a research project with the Black consumer right now as well. This is kind of our whole wheelhouse. And again, I'm not going to go through all of it today because it's a lot to cover off, but happy to talk to you at a later time about how we could support you with any of your marketing or research initiatives. A little bit about myself and a little about Edward. As you can see, I've got a breadth of background, really over 20 years of research within multicultural and diversity, both here and in the US. And before that, I worked with organizations as a Multicentral, Wellesley Institute, and St. Joe's Health Center. So I've got a range of for-profit and not-for-profit background looking at these issues and topics over many years. Edward's background is really one of the leading people I know in doing panel qualitative research. He's really good at unpacking insights and really asking the right questions that lead to actionable strategic planning, and really bringing the voice of the cultural consumer forward, which is critical when we get into these topics and conversations. And finally, I want to introduce Tim. Tim Morton will be speaking shortly. He's the managing partner of Prompta, which is one of Canada's first diverse change marketing consulting firms. Jason Thompson, who is the VP for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at WGH, and is a thought leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the US with over 25 years of experience. And Louis Dillon, who is the founder of Pink Attitude Evolution, just speaking about that later, and also as a rising star at TD Bank. A little bit about setting the stage now. So we're going to come at it from a certain point of view. Obviously, a lot of our background as CulturaliQ is looking at both ethnicity, but also other areas. What's really transforming North America is the rapid change of our workforce. We're getting on average about 340,000 permanent residents coming into the country on an annual basis, and over about 642,000 international students. And over the next 3 years, the government of Canada has mandated to bring in approximately 400,000 newcomers every year into the country, on top of international students and temporary workers. The reason they're doing this, of course, is an aging workforce, and we don't simply have enough North Americans coming into the workforce. So immigration is absolutely critical for our continued success as economies going forward into the future. And this is what's happening in terms of international students. The same thing's happening at colleges and universities. In order for colleges and universities to continue to be solvent and relevant, they're bringing international students in order to make sure they can fill the classrooms as well. And this is an entry point into the country. Many international students come in with a university degree, come into Canada, take 2 years of college, and then enter the Canadian workforce. It's kind of like a fast ticket to come into the country. And this is what's going to happen over the next 20 years. Look at the growth of the Filipino community, 189%, and the growth of the South Asian community at 113%. Huge changes in terms of the Canadian workforce. So it's critical that we are able, as a society in North America, to really effectively utilize newcomers into our workforce. And as you'll see, as we'll be talking about later, there are barriers to entry. There are barriers to advancement that we have to address as organizations moving forward in the future. Couple questions that I want to pose to you, and these are things that we found in recent research. If you look here, this was done recently for a major Canadian retailer. And if you look, for example, when I go into a store, I leave feeling anxious. Look at the gap between Gen Pop or non-ethnic and ethnic. Huge differences. And look again, when you break it down by subculture, look at the indexing, over-indexing of the Black community, for example. This represents the fact that DEI has to be viewed as a 360 challenge. You can't just be looking at internal DEI strategies. You have to look at how it impacts ultimately the consumer and all the stakeholders that you deal with as an organization. That's what really today is about. A couple other minor little tidbits as well I want to throw in. This is a research study we did recently for COVID, and I want to attention to a couple of things. Number one, brands. I will support companies that are more socially responsible. Huge numbers. And again, we don't have Gen Pop here. Gen Pop was around 30 to 40%. I will support those brands that I absolutely trust. Part of trust, again, especially these days, is having an effective DEI strategy in place. And certainly, we're going to be viewed going forward as by our consumers as having a DEI program. And finally, I want to look at a couple more slides to really set the stage for today's discussion. Social equality for everyone is important in our society. Massive numbers, again, way over indexing against Gen Pop. And the last point, which was kind of shocking for us, we did a survey in April, and we did a survey in October, and the numbers for the South Asian and Chinese in terms of the feeling of racialization or feeling racially challenged was almost quadruple. So from like mid-30s to low 30s over to 60s and 70s, just within 8 months within Canada. And that's a whole bunch of reasons. It's wash on from the Black Lives Matter effect. It's because of COVID and the China virus and all the things that happen, and just raise levels of awareness, sensitivity to these topics. So that's what we're doing today. Tim, over to you, please.
Great. Thanks, John, and thanks everybody. Again, my name is Tim Morton, and my pronouns are he and him, and I'm the founder and managing partner of Prompta. And Prompta in Latin is readiness. And if you can jump to the next slide. So just by way of Prompta, we're a change management company, and we're a change management company that's really been focused on culture change. When I started my career, so many years ago, I was part of, I was part of a big organization, big global organization, and we were going through a huge transformation, and it was a huge failure. And a big part of why it was a failure was because the business wasn't actively engaged, and leaders didn't know that they had a role, and there wasn't involvement throughout the organization. And from that point, I just said it just doesn't have to be like this. And for me, I spent my career working in change and trying to improve working cultures and working lives. And I joined a couple of big consulting firms over the years, helped them to roll out their change methodologies, went independent. And one of the things that I found was I wasn't always able to live my truths. And as a leader and a coach, a big job of mine is to get leaders to step up and be courageous and get out of their comfort zone. So for me, one of the things that was really important for me was to establish Prompta as a different type of consulting company, one that really focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, equality, and really bringing on, a diverse group of people that are really passionate about, being able to work together and do great things for clients. So that's how we came together. And it was really important for me as well not to end up being that hypocrite. So we ended up becoming Canada's first certified diverse LGBT-owned business in 2016. And we were Canada's LGBT plus business of the year in 2018, which was a huge honor. And so we are passionate about championing, culture change. And one of the things that we know is that if companies are diverse and if they treat their people equitably and they treat them, so that they belong and have a safe environment, it's going to be a healthier company. So if you could jump to the next slide, John. So really, when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we think of it as culture change. And what we were seeing for years was a lot of companies, they would talk about diversity and inclusion, and they'd include something on their website, or they'd spend some dollars to support an event or two throughout the year, but they really weren't on a journey to transform their culture. And we know that this isn't a tick the box exercise. This isn't going to be done with an event. This isn't going to happen, and you're not going to change hearts and minds, with a 2-hour workshop. It's a start, but it needs to be part of a program. So what we look to and what we bring is we know how to transform company cultures. That's what we do. That's what we're passionate about. But we also need tools in order to do it. So, a couple of years ago, we just, as a change company, we just decided, we don't have proper tools. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to create technology so that we could actually start to measure not only how diverse an organization is by, their demographics and KPIs, but start to measure inclusion, start to measure how equitably people feel like they're treated within an organization, and start to measure their sense of belonging and create that sustainability. The other area, and I'll talk to it shortly, is we leverage the global diversity, equity, and inclusion benchmark. That's one of the things that we do with a lot of our clients because it's a global standard and it looks at diversity, equity, and inclusion from a 360 lens. So really, the key thing for us is we know that diversity, equity, and inclusion is culture change. And it's so paramount that companies look at it as culture change. And it's going to take time and it's a journey, but it's a journey that's well worth the ride. If you could go to the next slide. Here, I just wanted to, and I won't spend too much time on these, but I wanted to give you a quick view to, Prompt AI and what we're trying to do. As I mentioned, when you think about companies trying to measure diversity, equity, and inclusion, they've got a fairly good handle in a lot of cases on diversity. They can look and they can see, from a demographic perspective, I have this many people in this age range. I have this many people that are female or identify as female. I have this, and they can slice and dice that. And they can also have KPIs, but a lot of times they don't know whether their programs are actually working. Are we becoming more inclusive? Do people that are diverse, do they actually have a voice? Do they feel like they've got a future within our organization? So a big part of developing Prompt AI was to start to look at what's happening within the culture of the organization. And we create culture, even if we don't mean to, we create cultures for the majority within organizations. And quite often, we look at sentiment within the organization and we forget, or we aren't able to look at, hey, what is this underrepresented group? What is their experience? What are they feeling like? And we really wanted to understand employees' lived experiences. And what you're seeing here is just an executive dashboard that comes out of our tool. And we're measuring employee sentiment when it comes to, how included they feel across, in this case, across 6 areas. We were looking at, the vision for diversity and inclusion. We were looking at, what does success look like for it? How involved are leaders? What kind of capabilities do we have in order to transition? And what does our culture look like? And if you can, see from that slide, the 2 big areas that company at a very macro level, they weren't doing a good job clearly articulating what their vision was and bringing that vision to life. And they weren't doing a good job at really looking at their culture. If you can jump to the next slide. Here, won't spend too much time, but I just wanted to show you part of what Prompt AI is doing is it's using natural language processing, machine learning, topic modeling, and clustering. And what it's doing is it's taking the voice of the employee and it's turning it into topics. And then from there, we can start to slice and dice. So, and the big thing that it's doing is no matter what, no matter how open we are, we all come with our conscious and unconscious biases. So it's really important for us to allow the machine to do the work, to really figure out what are those topics that people are looking at and what's so important. And if you can go to the next slide. The other part is, and I've already touched on this, we really want to look at underrepresented groups. We want to look and see how they're feeling. We want to be able to see, do females within the organization feel like they have a voice? Do they feel like when they say something that people are listening? So it's so important. And it's really important that we get in and look at those anomalies within the data. You can jump to slide 6. As I mentioned, the other area that we look to measure diversity and inclusion is using the global diversity, equity, and inclusion benchmarks. And some things with this, and part of the reason we use it, it's becoming a global standard, and it's just a tool, and it doesn't work for all organizations, but it's a tool that's free to use, and it was developed by 112 DEI experts from around the globe. And it really, what it does is it analyzes where your company is and where you are against specific standards. And it measures your company across, 15 different categories that, look at internal, look at external, look at what you're doing from a diversity and inclusion perspective. And so that's just one of the tools that we're using. So, John, I wanted to hand it back to you, but thanks for the update.
Well, thank you, Edgar. I appreciate that. Jason, over to you now for a little introduction and then your background and what you offer.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. I am Jason Thompson. I'm currently Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Western Governors University in the US. And then on the side, I have a small startup called Cape Inclusion. I launched it because I've been working in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the US for probably 25 plus years. And I've launched diversity programs in healthcare, education, sport. And I built the diversity program for Team USA. And as part of that, I came up with a way to measure diversity. In the US, Team USA is a nonprofit. And every single sport, of course, as Americans, we can make anything complicated. Every single sport in the US is an independent nonprofit. And so when they hired me, they said, Jason, how are we going to compare USA basketball to USA volleyball, USA soccer? As you can imagine, certain sports have a lot more resources than other sports. And so I developed a scorecard. From that scorecard, a magazine, I think it was 2017, named it the #1 innovation in diversity for that year. And we beat out companies that were like Microsoft, names you would know, huge companies, Arrow, Electronics, big companies, big US companies. And I did that with a budget of about $50,000. The scorecard was quite effective. So on the next slide, you can see the company we launched is called Cape Inclusion. And essentially to make this simplified, and how I showed I could simplify this is, for many years I worked there, the director of HR kept telling me, Jason, we should be 30% diverse. We have to be 30% diverse. And I kept telling him we couldn't do it. It's not going to happen. And eventually I built a way to measure it, because it was clear to me we're never going to get 30% diversity. And the reason we couldn't is because she didn't understand the equation, how to get to 30% diversity. In order to make a company more diverse, people have to leave. And if you think about it, every single leader you hire, they're tasked with keeping people to stay. I mean, these people, your job as a leader is to keep good people. If they're good at keeping good people, I can't make the organization more diverse. It's a simple equation, but most people just simply do not understand that. And so what I did is basically built something to understand that. So I took the scorecard, and you then basically create this intersection between that scorecard and the data a company has. I can tell you whether or not you set a goal you can even achieve. And that's the biggest miss I see all the time in diversity in companies that want to do diversity. They actually set goals they can't achieve. They're mathematically impossible. Or if you were to achieve it, it'd mean your culture is terrible. If you think about it, to get to 30% diverse, they literally had to have turnover about 60% over a 3-year period. You don't want that. Like, no organization will want that kind of turnover. If you don't understand that equation, your diversity work is going to fail. I can tell you that right now, before you even sit down. If you have this unrealistic expectation, you cannot achieve. You'll basically fail, and you'll be disappointed and wonder why your diversity program doesn't work. So on the next slide, I basically simply walk you through how does this work. CAPE is a platform that literally sits on top and works with your HR software. So if it's ADP, Workday, whatever it might be, typically most companies already have this data. They just don't know how to organize it. We began organize it and giving you basically a table so you can see how diverse your organization is, where that diversity is, and then do your training accordingly. That's another miss. Typically what happens is you train everybody and you do this one-time training, and of course it doesn't work. In the US, they found that these trainings are failures. They don't work. Everyone's disappointed. And the reason being is it's built to fail. No one does one-time training that ever works. If you think about it in education, if you took a calculus class in college, you went every day. Why? Because it's a complicated subject that takes time to learn. Somehow with diversity, we assume, oh, this is simple. I can teach you in 45 minutes and you'll remember it forever. Unconscious bias is a perfect example. It's a complicated, and it's unconscious bias, meaning you don't know you have it. If you don't know you have it, you go right back to that old habit, even if we can raise your awareness about it in a 45-minute training. And Tim made this point as well. If you want organizational change, you have to build it on a platform that'll give you organizational change. One-time training will not do that. And that's why that continues to fail. So on the next slide, you can just see kind of a simple example of the solution we came up with is diversity is important because you have to track it. And by tracking it, you can know if you're having success, but you can also train the right people at the right time. So for example, we can tell you what kind of bias you have and where it is, whether it's recruitment bias or selection bias. By knowing that, I now know what to train you. And we know what training would work, or if it doesn't work, I know because I'm tracking it. That's essentially what we do. I'm oversimplified. There's some other metrics we put in there, but that simple process ensures success. And generally that's what we found when we work with the clients. Of course, we're small, we're new, but and because I built this when I was at Team USA and have used it again to launch other diversity programs, I can just basically tell you it works. Why? Because it simplifies the process. You stop boiling the ocean. Generally, most diversity programs don't have enough staff or resource to fix every single problem. But I can help you prioritize what's the best use of your time. That's why I could take 50,000 and beat out Microsoft with our program, is because I could create efficiencies. Rather than boiling the ocean, if I know where the trouble is, for instance, if it's director and above, and that's where your hiring challenges are, that's where your energy should be spent. You probably have a glass ceiling rather than fixing every single hire. Most companies don't empower the diversity program to impact every single hire. So as a diversity officer, if I know which hires I can impact, which will have the highest impact, I'm then creating an efficiency. You then create success and a way to measure that success. On the last slide, you'll see that I'm quite a data nerd. Actually. Oh, is that the last? I thought there's one more between there.
Sorry, yeah.
It's okay, but just real quickly, there's another tool we built, which is an inclusion measure. The other thing I found is it's hard to measure inclusion. Tim has a lot of good data points he's using. I tend to be very much about behaviors and measuring those behaviors. And in the US, there's quite a bit of research to show that women and people of color in meetings are ignored, your ideas are taken, you're spoken over. So I started tracking it. And so in meetings, we start tracking that behavior. You're also told you should redirect back to that individual, or you should repeat what they just said, echo it. There's a lot of different ways to define it. But by tracking that, I can measure inclusion. And it also signals to employees what they should do. That's the other problem with diversity and inclusion is people don't know what to do. So if I can tell you these are the behaviors we're trying to stop, I can tell you we're measuring it. I know when it's happening. I know when it's not happening. We know if it's improved. And so on a very simple way, you can see my simple mind just connects simple data points, connects them to some data that we can track so you know where you're at and whether or not it's working. Generally, that's the biggest challenge I've found, at least in the US, is people don't know if it's working and they don't know what data to track. And so by quickly organizing it, I can ensure success, and you can know whether or not it's working. So, John, that's it for me. My brain is small.
I'm missing slide. I apologize. I don't know what,
Yeah, no worries.
Not
No worries.
translation across the border, I guess. Anyway, that was great. Thank you so much for that presentation. And well, over to you, Ruby, for your background as well.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Tim and Jason, for those insights this afternoon and everything you shared. I'm going to bring in a different perspective in terms of this whole conversation today, in terms of what I think a responsibility is of yourself and how you could play a role in the community to make change happen. And so what I'd like to introduce you to the audience today is Pink Attitude Evolution. It's a non-for-profit organization. John, if you could just flip to the next slide. Oh, we're going to go into the stats first. Okay, I'll let you go into the stats first.
No, you go ahead. This is all yours.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. These are actually really important.
We did some recent research on behalf of Pink, and so if you look, for example, the growth of women in the workforce who come from visible minorities, we saw a 21% growth rate from 2011 to 2016. Whereas you compare that to non-visible minority women, it was 0.5 in a negative sense. So you see the difference between that. So the growth is all coming now, predominantly, again, back to my first presentation, from newcomers in the country, and it's very similar in the U.S. as well. And then if you look at unemployment rates as a corollary, the unemployment rate is highest among visible minority women, at 9.6% among non-visible, at 11% with South Asian, and at 12% with Black women with a degree of diploma. So there's clearly a problem here. And then finally, if you look at income, and we know obviously there's a disparity between male and female income. It also exists within different cohorts within the female population as well. And again, look at the gap between 44,000 for non-visible against 30,000 or 34,000 for visible minority women. So clearly there's a problem, and this particularly is an issue when you've got a South Asian cohort, for example, that is highly educated, one of the highest educated of any cohort within Canada, within the workforce, and yet one of the lowest paid. Over to you.
Thank you, John. And so I want to also add in another stat that as we're embarking upon this national study, which will be out in the public forum in the next little bit, but we're heading towards the net zero birth in Canada by 2035. South Asians specifically are the largest visible minority group in Canada. So those stats themselves, I think, call for action for us as community leaders, members of this community, to take action. And so that's where Pink Attitude Evolution has come in. So we're a not-for-profit organization in Canada where women of South Asian are empowered to reach their full potential. So going back to what John said, and I want to reiterate these numbers again, South Asian women are the highest unemployed group in Canada at 20.4%. And we are the highest educated group amongst all visible minorities and non-visible minorities. And yet we also are a decade younger than all visible minority groups and other cohorts in Canada. So, when you look about that change that's going to happen in 2035, not coupling into fact new immigrants that we haven't accounted for in this survey, as well as the baby boomers generation that will be turning over in the next little bit. I think we're here to say that there's some red alarms that need to be taken off here, and we as an organization are going to plow ahead and make a difference here. So when I look at a lot of people ask us in terms of like, how do you start? And I think it just starts with a small attempt of establishing a foundation. For us, it's been this organization 5 years, 6 years running. It started with us having conversations and then bridging the gap in terms of congregating together in a foundation perspective. So we have 4 cohorts that we specialize in. So it's high school students, university, middle management, and something we coined as next chapter, which are women who've been out of the workforce or re-entering in the workforce. John, if we can go to the next slide, please. So what do we know today, and how do we think that we can start solving for this? And we've come up together with the 3R approach. We're going to help women reach, realize, and recognize their potential, and being able to spin this out in all the 4 cohorts that we're looking at. John, if we can please go to the next slide. And some of the commitment that we have in terms of the organization is that we're going to be doing annual summits, workshops. We have an awards gala coming up this Wednesday, recognizing powerful, game-changing South Asian women. And we have a quarterly newsletter out in which we use that as a form to hit our grassroots organizations on representing South Asian women, their stories, what's affecting them from a financial standpoint to a mental health standpoint. We're doing a podcast series, which is launched with a CBC director, and it's already in its fourth episode. And it's been well received in terms of some conversations that we sometimes have within our immediate circles, but we may not have the answers just because a lot of us are first generation here and are still navigating our way through various different channels and various different organizations. And so I think it's a great forum for us to be able to disseminate information and to share that. And the last thing that we're excited and proud to be championing with CulturaliQ is a national study, which again, I've reiterated a couple of times in terms of the stats that we see here.
Okay, Ruby, thanks. I appreciate your points. That's great. Thank you so much. So we're going to turn it over to Q&A. We've got some questions that we said we would address as part of it, but please send any questions you may have. Send them to Ed or put them into the general chat, and we look forward to addressing those as well as part of the discussion. So I'm going to ask all the panelists for some answers for the following questions. So the first question is DEI important? Over to you, Jason.
Yeah, it's the short answer is yes, but I think Ruby's data and the data you shared actually show how important it is in the sense of underemployment and unemployment economically cost the entire country. And a lot of times people don't think about it. If I don't have dollars to spend, it impacts the entire economy when I'm not buying things. And so if I'm underemployed, I can't buy the things that drive the economy. And so there's a huge loss. Or if I have this incredible skill set that the country is not maximizing, it costs the country. There's a cost there. And so many times we think of it very individually, like, oh, what do we look like, rather than thinking, what's the real impact on our economy when people who are clearly qualified for these amazing jobs aren't being employed to the level of tools that they can bring as a resource, and how much must be lost in that process. So the importance of DEI to me is not just in this moment, but also for your future, because the economy is not going to prosper the way it could if people aren't fully employed. And that's good on so many levels. And so I do think many times it's not really feel good. It's how do you maximize the economy, but also how do you maximize your company? I mean, clearly there's a resource you're not even maximizing yet. So on a lot of different levels, you need to have a DEI plan, and it's definitely a priority.
Jim, anything want to add to that?
Oh yeah, you know what? It's just to build on Jason's comments. It is huge, and the business case for diversity, equity, inclusion is huge. There's study after study that says if you're a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive company, you have better customer service. You're better at problem solving. You have happier customers. You're able to attract and retain the best and brightest. You're going to have a more productive workforce. You're going to have more collaboration. Innovation will grow because you've got a diversity of thought and attitude, and you're going to be more profitable. And just one quick thing here, when you think about how do we increase, how do we become more diverse? If we can, as companies, become more inclusive and treat people more equitably, they're going to stay. Yeah. And we're going to have a stronger workforce. So, no, it's so important.
Ruby, over to you. Any thoughts on this question?
I'd echo everything Jason and Tim are saying. I want to also, another stat came to my mind as we're building up this national study. In Canada, we are, in the next 5 years, the labor force is going to be driven 100% by immigration. So that in itself, I think, alludes to the fact why D&I is important.
Okay, thank you all. Next question. How do we align D&I expectations from both internal and external stakeholders? So if I can get Chairman to start off with this one, please. Aligning internal and external.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's so important that we don't look at DEI as just an event. We really look at it as a corporate-wide initiative. We've got to look at all elements of it, and it's just it's so important that we don't just look at, it's what's happening within my workforce. You need to know what's happening within your environment. What's happening with your products, with how you market, how you go to business. And one of the key things that we've seen is, as employees and as leaders, everything we say and do matters. Yep. And as companies, we're moving from, that view, that short view of the shareholder to stakeholders. And that's just so important.
Thank you. That's great. Jason, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, obviously Tim's made a lot of very good points. And I think one of the things I would add to this is that, and we're seeing a lot of this in the US with all the issues around social justice and social activism. People are looking at your board, they're looking at your leadership team, and they're deciding whether or not they're going to spend their dollars with a company if that company doesn't align with their beliefs and how they prioritize diversity. And so if it's not reflected internally, it's going to hurt you externally because it's a priority. Many people look at your company and ask, are you really committed to change? You can sense the frustration with all the protests we've had over the summer, and even this week, I think highlight how people have prioritized diversity within the US and other parts of the world. And I think one of the things that many times that people are forgetting is a lot of times they do the superficial part of it. Like we say the right thing and we act like it's in that moment, but people are starting to ask, well, what does your board look like? Who gets promoted? What are you saying publicly? Your silence is, and on issues around diversity is going to be held against you. And people are saying, you know what, we can no longer stand on the sidelines. And companies that stand on the sidelines, we will not spend our dollars with you. And so the impact is going to be big, and it's going to be, one of the things where the companies who align themselves with the future will be success. Those who wait will wonder what happened.
That's good. I want to add one more point. As an old-time retailer, you got to think about your supply chain too. It goes right back to even right downstream in terms of who your suppliers are and what their D&I strategy. You really got to look at it broadly, because that could have a direct knock-on effect directly on your return on investment as well, in the perception in the terms of the different consumers as well. Next question. How do we effectively measure D&I initiatives, short and long term? You've both taken the points, and that's what I'd love you guys to dialogue, the two of you. How do you measure both that short-term impact? Okay, let's take a state of the nation, as you call it, but how do you really track long-term success? Again, looking at it from a 360 point of view, please. Tim, over to you.
Tim, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you know what? One of the things for me to really, it's so key that we look at this from an overall culture perspective, and look at it from the whole culture. And one of the things, and Jason's touched on it, is it's not about changing. It's not about changing a policy. This isn't about the flavor of the month. This is about really understanding what's happening within your culture, and it's about moving from words to actions, and understanding what your benchmarks are and starting to measure them, and putting real measurable targets, and being honest when you can't achieve them, or celebrating when you do achieve them, and when you can't achieve them, making sure that you're course correcting in order to do that. And for me, it's just so important to stay the course.
Jason, anything to add there?
You know what? It reminded me of this is an old story. I don't know if it's universal, but there's a story that was told me that a university president went to the head of his engineering school, and he asked the engineering dean, "What's your goal for our students?" And the engineering dean responded with, "Our goal is to create today's best engineer." And the university president said, "You're failing them. Your goal is to create tomorrow's best engineer." And so to answer this question, it seems to me that companies should be asking themselves, what is their goal? Is it to be today's best company or to be tomorrow's best company, and continue to be on this trajectory that's always going to put you in a position to be competitive and lead? Yep. And your diversity and inclusion work has to be, what do we look like right now? And so I think some of the practical measures are important. Like, what do we look like? Therefore, we need to know what are we going to look like? And that means not only who's employed, but what's our customer base look like? Yeah. And where's it going to grow? That's a missing piece I think a lot of times think about is, if you look at your customer base, say, well, it's not very diverse, That's a huge opportunity. It's not just feel good. It's to say, if I knew there were no Asian women buying my products, that would be a huge opportunity. It doesn't mean you're failing right now. It means I've looked short term, what my data is right now, and I can see this huge opportunity for me. And then how do I then align myself to achieve that? And that's the miss. Like, it has to be not only in your culture. Another example gives my daughter came to me one time with this magazine and said, "Look at this, Jason," or Dad, I guess she calls me, just call me Jason. But she says they have this makeup, and the makeup for people with brown skin, there's only four shades. Yeah. But yet for white women, there's 20 shades. And what a missed opportunity. She says, jokingly, well, they need a diversity program, Dad. And she's right. If you look at a demographic and you're providing them those services, you're leaving a lot of economics on the table. And you should also have someone in the room who can point out to you, well, there seems to be a disparity here. And if your staff doesn't look like your client base or your potential client base, you'll never be able to connect those dots in such a way to benefit from it. And so it brings this whole thing full circle. Why is diversity important? Why should you measure it? What should look like short-term and long-term? All these pieces are connected to your success.
Excellent point. I love bringing in the consumer voice into this as well, because that's key, obviously, right? Looking at the impact both internally and, again, externally.
Exactly.
Just next question. How do we link customer satisfaction service to a robust D&I program? Why don't you carry on, Jason, on this one? It's kind of measuring.
Yeah. Why I think this is important is, and I always get this because I do diverse people always say to me, Jason, I'm afraid I might say the wrong thing. I'm concerned, I don't know what to say. What if I say the wrong thing? And in my mind, if you've always been trying to be committed to the community, when you make that misstep, they'll support you and go, oh, I get it. You have a long history of trying to do the right thing. I understand that in this moment. But if you've never done anything and then you continue to say offensive things, you're not going to have a customer base. Like, that customer satisfaction is actually protection. If you think about it in the context of what's our strategy and why should we have this 360 view? Because I have employees who've had a good experience, our customers have a good experience, and hopefully nothing, you don't say these terrible faux pas or whatever, but inevitably we typically do. But once you built that foundation, people will trust and go, yeah, it was just inadvertent. You didn't mean anything by it. But if you're always never in that space and it never feels like you're committed to the community, when that happens, it's going to just snowball, because guess what? You never built the foundation. And really, that's what the opportunity is now, is if your customers are satisfied, they're going to support you. And when your customers support you, your internal employees feel satisfied, they're going to support the external sales, and you're going to get success. And so these things are intimately connected.
Jason? Sorry, Tim, any comments you want to add to that?
Yeah, Jason, you're just spot on. You're absolutely spot on. And we see it with leaders who say, I just don't want to screw up. I just want to screw up. And they're even, they're well, what term do I use? And what acronyms do I use? And what do I do? And the most important thing is trust, and is trying. And it's really, stepping up and being consistent. And the other key element, of course, is listening. So often, leaders within organizations forget to listen. And just stopping and listening to your people, or stopping and listening to your customer, and understanding what their needs are, what their concerns are, and really just listening. And the pace of change, it's increasing so fast. And when I think about the number of Fortune 500 companies that that no longer are on the list that were on the list in 1980, and then if you think about that 10 years from now, I think the numbers are going to really shift with those companies that don't really think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's going to have a huge impact on whether companies stay, because customers are in there for the long-term journey. And if you lose their trust, just like losing the trust of your employees, it's so hard to get that back. So
I want to add one comment. I want to add one comment here as well. We do sort of localized market trend analysis. And I remember having one, I worked for a number of auto dealers at one point. And so I remember it was a dealership in Brampton, and a temple a temple went out of it, way out of the farmer's field, all by itself in the middle of nothing. Beautiful temple was put up. And I remember walking to the guy, meeting the guy, and I said, "You watch out. In the next 2 years, your dealership's going to be completely South Asian. There's no way. It's all Italian here. It's never going to change." Within 2 years, absolutely, the transition had happened immediately with massive immigration. All the area around that became filled with South Asians that had moved into the country. It can happen really quickly at local level. And so you're absolutely right. Having a diversity United strategy, looking at the trend lines as to where your community is moving is essential for survival these days at local and macro level. Next question. Just in time, I thought we'd lost you, Mubi. I thought suddenly you were missing. Welcome back.
As always, right? Technology.
We're all going through it these days, aren't we? Well, what is the role of a community-based organization on the DEI discussion? Your thoughts?
Lots of important role. A big important role. I feel sometimes change. We've shared it all, in this chat for an hour, and we've spoken about it. And I feel like the biggest difference I've seen in my experience of doing community work is it starts from the community, and you can champion the change that you want to see right from the community that you're from, so to speak. And I think Pink Attitude Evolution is a testament to that. Joining you guys on that national study and, discovering the fact that, we're the largest minority group in Canada, and, at the same fact, South Asian women are the highest unemployed. I think that in itself, is something that, could have not been brought to the forefront had it been not teaming up with yourself and having this organization and volunteers behind it.
That's great. Thank you. Next question. I wanted to go to the floor. We have a question. How is DEI being implemented in a K-12 environment, especially in city centers? Anybody want to take that one on? Tim?
Sorry. So the question is, how is diversity being
implemented in K-12 environment, especially in city centers, in the educational front?
Oh my goodness. This really isn't my forte. But what I will say is, what we've seen even in Ontario is we've seen them, roll back some of the curriculum, some of the progressive curriculum in talking about, issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've seen a rollback. So, teachers are held back from what they can actually teach in certain areas. So we're not allowing teachers to be as progressive as, maybe we were able to in Ontario 10 years ago.
Wow.
And,
so
yeah. And, the other side of it too is that, it's so important, it's that idea, of the community that raises the individual. And it's just important that, as parents, and as trusted leaders, that, we're calling out behaviors when we see it. And we're helping to make sure to reinforce actions that are going to support, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if somebody sees something that's, racist in nature, as an adult, having the courage to call that out and have a conversation with, with your child and just say, hey, you know what, let's talk about this. And it's just so crucial if they're not getting it within the classroom.
Jason, any thoughts from the U.S. perspective?
Yeah, we're struggling with it. I think Tim actually, depending on local governments and things, sometimes they're rolling some things back. But obviously, we've had so many things going on in the public space that a lot of these schools have to reassess. But it's been a challenge. I think part of it is people are just so uncomfortable, and we've never taught people how to talk about it. For years in the U.S., it's always been be colorblind, and it's clear that doesn't work. You can't deny reality and use this colorblind mentality to deal with solutions. It's not a solution. There's no other context in which we would use that as a solution. I mean, you don't say, I'll act as if you don't have cancer and it'll go away. But somehow with race in the US, we've decided, we're colorblind. And if we act like we're colorblind, all issues around race go away. It just doesn't work. And that equation is clearly coming to a head for us And so, the reality of what's ahead of us, it's got to be dealt with. And I do think our K-12 system is struggling with it, but hopefully we're moving in the right direction here, and we'll start having more of these uncomfortable conversations, but they have to be had to get change.
That's where it starts for sure. Point. Next question, consumer attitudes and sentiment towards DEI initiatives. Gooby, do you want to take that one on for a second? You're a consumer as well.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think, one of the personal sentiments that I have is when you're looking at the top of the house and you have no idea in terms of what your consumers are about, what they like, or don't have insights into that. I think where it's a lost opportunity for business. It's a lost opportunity to sticking to the brand in terms of what Jason and Tim have both reiterated. I can say that in terms of some of the experience I have at TD working on their diversity work, and in terms of the consumer being having a seat at the table and being able to work with them in terms of these community or consumer products and stuff. I think it's really been a great win for us at TD, and in terms of I think something that needs to be done across the board.
Okay. Good, thank you. I saw a raised hand. I don't know if Edward, you want to see who raised your hand?
We have one more question here. This came in as well. I guess I can read it out right now. How do you see AI, artificial intelligence, being utilized in bringing DEI to life?
Tim, why don't you start that one off?
Yeah. So for me, the importance of the importance of using AI. AI just the biggest thing for us we see is we need to have factual information. So when we try and have a conversation to change culture with leaders, if I don't have facts, if I don't have something backed by that I can stand with, I'm going to have a hard time getting that leader to buy in. So what we know is diversity, equity, and inclusion often involves really hard conversations and some hard truths. And it's really important if we can leverage AI to really understand, the lived experience of employees within an organization, or the lived experience of, for example, females who don't feel that they have a voice, who feel like every time that they go into a meeting, they raise something, it's not heard till their male colleague does it. And when we're able to go to a leader and say, you know what, you thought you dealt with this issue 5 years ago, obviously you haven't. Here's what your people are saying, and here's a litany of what they're telling us. So the biggest thing with AI that we're finding is if we can get better data, if we can really zero in on what's happening within the organization, then we've got a better chance of changing culture and keeping things moving forward.
Yep. Okay, thank you. That's good. Last question, and I've got a few more raised hands I saw, is how do we connect DEI to corporate responsibility and sustainability programs? Maybe I'd like you to take a shot at this one if you can, please. From a TD Bank perspective, how do you connect the dots around those two issues? Okay, well, Jason, why don't you take a shot at this too, if you can, please?
Yeah, I think I always tell people audio has to match video. So if you're claiming these things are important, people don't see it, it's not going to work, and you'll get called out on it. And it also can benefit you. I think a lot of times a good example is Nike. Like in the U.S., when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, Nike supported Colin, and you can tell it paid off. Their commitment to diversity was proof. They backed Colin, and he proved to be right. And it was a gamble, but I think they also saw the world's becoming more diverse. These issues are going to come forward. And the thing that people don't forget, that they have a strong customer base because of it. They're always about women's issues. They're always about issues that affect people of color. They've taken stands on LGBTQ, and it's protected them, and it's given them a very strong customer base. Because the thing people forget is that Nike had a scandal at the same time, which most people have forgotten about, where many of their leaders were asked to leave. It was around sexual harassment, and it never really caught any traction because they've done so many things to show this is where their commitment is. And this is a point people miss with diversity many times. They built a foundation that even when there was a misstep, they were protected. Why? Because they had proof. Look, yeah, we make mistakes. We're only human. People believe them. If they had made that kind of misstep and there was nothing to support it, it would have been a huge scandal and probably would have crushed Nike. But Nike survived it. Most people have already forgotten about it as if it didn't happen. But they have so many ways to prove, look, we're committed to this. Look what we do, where we spend our dollars in the community. We are committed. Sure, we were not perfect and people believed them. And so this, by systematically connecting these pieces, it gives them a strong customer base and puts them in front of all their competitors.
That's a good example. But the reservoir of trust over time, and you would draw when you need it. Good example. Ed, any more questions that we should deal with before we go on to the conclusion of today's webinar?
That's all the questions we have so far, John.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we just wanted to move on to the next. First of all, I want to thank Tim, Jason, and Ruby for today for your great discussion, and it was great having you guys today. We hope to do this again sometime soon, but I wanted to thank all of you for attending today and for facilitating today's discussion as well. So we got a few more minutes. We just want to talk about, so now what? Really, it's about addressing the challenge. So today's really about the 360 perspective, and I just want to start off with this. Your stakeholders are quite diverse. You've got customers, you've got the government, you've got communities, you've got employees, investors, and suppliers. And traditionally, most DEI programs really focus on one little tiny piece. And in today's complex, multinational organizations, that isn't enough. You've got to take a 360 perspective. And then, so that's really what we're offering with the three organizations, is coming together to say, we could take a 360 viewpoint. And really, it's the only one that I've seen, which is why we recognize an opportunity to build a 360 approach to DEI. It's really about measuring cultural change, not just one time, but an ongoing process of really tracking, identifying where you are today and how DEI can change cultural transformation, short and long term. It's about having a system in place like Prompt AI, allowing you to get that sentiment analysis and really the lived voice of the employee. And it's about having those metrics with CAPE inclusion tracking software to, again, track long-term success, because without that in place, it will not be successful. We've seen again and again where DEI programs start off with the good intentions, but then without the systems in place to track both short and long-term, longitudinally, and in real time in some cases, it's really important to have that in place. And finally, we want to offer as well the external stakeholders. So we want to work with you to really identify what's the voice of the external stakeholder. How is DEI important to them? And what are the metrics we want to track internally and externally to make sure there's a comprehensive strategy built so that you really build a 360 system that makes sure you're successful from all those stakeholders you need to think about as you move forward. And finally, the DEI communications is about developing corporate sentiment through social media listening and through our field intelligence tracker. Short little surveys that track longitudinally how you're doing externally from the voice of the external stakeholder as well. We have a 3-step process, which is really about a current assessment phase, the gap analysis and project plan, and then an ongoing tactical 360 solution to really make sure your programs are successful for all stakeholders from a 360 perspective. And finally, we just want to say thank you so much for today's conversation. You can reach out to any of us here, and I'll make sure I leave this up for a few minutes. And we're actually offering a limited 360 assessment study program. We're going to accept only 4 or 5 organizations as part of our case study launch. So we'll let you guys, we'll send all of you that are on the call and those that couldn't make it today, kind of a template for what we're offering and the opportunity to work with really a great team. Thank you all for your time today, and we wish you well. All the best. Now, one last thing. Sorry, Ruby, you want to mention this. Over to you. You get your plug.
Thank you, John. As I mentioned earlier today, we do have our annual awards gala coming up on Wednesday, April 28th at 6 p.m. You can find ticket information on our website at pinkattitude.ca. We have a stellar lineup of amazing, game-changing women, and look forward to hopefully seeing all of you guys at the gala. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Okay, and with that, thank you all. Have a great day.